The kings arrive at Bethlehem. I saw the kings leaving Jerusalem in the same order in which they had come. They left by a gate to the south, first Mensor, the youngest, then Seir, and lastly, Theochino. They were followed by a crowd as far as the brook outside the city, and here the rabble left them and turned back home. On the opposite side of the brook, the kings halted and looked for their star. To their great joy, they saw it, and on again they went, singing sweetly. But what I wondered was that the star did not guide them by a direct route from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. They went more to the west and passed a little city that is well known to me. Beyond the same, I saw them halting at a beautiful place to pray. A well sprang up before them. They dismounted and dug a basin for water, surrounding it with sand and sods. They remained here several hours and watered their beasts. For in Jerusalem, on account of their anxiety and trouble, they had had no rest. The star, which by night looked like a globe of light, now had the appearance of the moon, and when seen by day, but still it did not appear exactly round, but somewhat pointed. I saw that it had often hidden behind the clouds. The high road between Bethlehem and Jerusalem swarmed with people, travelers with their baggage on their asses. They were, perhaps on account of the census, returning from Bethlehem to distant homes, or going up to Jerusalem to the temple or the markets. But on the route taken by the kings, it was very quiet. Perhaps the star guided them that way, that they might escape notice and arrive in Bethlehem in the evening. It was twilight when the caravan drew up before Bethlehem, at the same gate at which Mary and Joseph had stopped. When the star had disappeared, the kings went to the house, the former abode of Joseph's parents, and in which Joseph and Mary had recently been inscribed. Here they thought they were to find the newborn king. It was a spacious mansion with numerous small buildings around it, an enclosed courtyard in front, and stretching beyond that, a lawn with trees and a fountain. I saw on the lawn Roman soldiers because of the tax offices in the house. Crowds of people thronged around the newcomers, whose beasts were being watered under the trees near the fountain. The kings and their followers dismounted. The people showed them every mark of respect. They were not rude to them, as they had been to Joseph. They presented green branches and supplied them with food and drink. But I could see that it was principally in consideration of the gold pieces, which the kings were freely dispersing. I saw the travelers tarrying long in doubt and anxiety. At last I saw a light rising in the heavens on the opposite side of Bethlehem, over the region of the crib. The light was like that of the rising moon. I saw the caravan again set out and wind around the south side of Bethlehem, toward the east, thus bringing on one hand the field in which Christ's birth had been announced to the shepherds. When the caravan had filed down into the valley of the crib cave, all dismounted and began to set up their tents, while the people that had crowded after them from Bethlehem returned to the city. The encampment was partly pitched when over the cave shone out the star, and in it a child plainly visible, It stood directly above the crib, its stream of light falling straight down upon it. The kings and their followers uncovered their heads and watched it sinking lower and lower, increasing in size as it approached the earth. It looked to me as large as a sheet, I think. All were at first amazed. It was already dark. No dwelling was to be seen around, only the hill of the crib cave, looking like a rampart on the plain. But soon their amazement turned to joy, and they sought the entrance of the cave. Mensor pushed back the door, and there, in the upper end of the cave, which was resplendent with light, he beheld Mary sitting with the child, and looking just like the Virgin they had seen so often in their star pictures. Mensor stepped back and told his companions what he had seen, and then all three entered the passage. I saw Joseph coming out to them with an old shepherd and speaking to them in a quite friendly way. The kings told them in a few words that they had come to adore the newborn king of the Jews, whose star they had seen, and bring him gifts. Joseph humbly bade them welcome, and they went back to their tents in order to prepare themselves for the ceremony of their presentation. The old shepherd accompanied the king's servants to the little valley behind the hill, where there were sheds and shepherd stalls, in order to care for their beasts. The caravan filled the whole of the little valley. Each king was accompanied by his 4 relatives. All followed Saint Joseph with some of their servants to the shed before the entrance of the cave. Here they spread the cloth over the table and stood on it several of the boxes they had hanging at their girdles, to be presented as their gifts in common. Then 2 youths of Mensor's train went in at the door, laid down strips of carpet all the way up to the crib, and withdrew to a distance. Now Mensor and his 4 companions entered, having previously laid aside their sandals. 2 servants bore the table with the gifts through the passage up to the crib cave, but at the entrance Mensor took it from them, carried it himself, and on bended knee placed it at Mary's feet. The other kings and their companions remained standing at the entrance. I saw the cave filled with supernatural light. Opposite the entrance, and on the spot where Jesus was born, was Mary, leaning on one arm in a posture more reclining than sitting. By her side was Joseph, and on her right, in a raised trough, with a cover thrown over it, lay the infant Jesus. At Mensor's entrance, Mary rose to a sitting posture, drew her veil around her, and took the child, which she enveloped in its folds, upon her lap. But she drew the veil aside sufficiently to allow the child to be seen, as far as below the little arms. She held it upright, leaning against her breast, its little head supported by her hand. The infant folded its little hands, and upon its breast, as if in prayer. It was shining with light, was very gracious, and at times extended its little hands, as if grasping something. Mensor fell on his knees before Mary, bowed his head, crossed his hands on his breast, and offered the gifts with some reverent words. Then he took from the bag at his girdle a handful of little metal bars, about 1 finger in length, thick and heavy. They were pointed at the upper end, granular in the middle, and shone like gold. He laid them humbly on Mary's lap by the child, as his gift to her. Mary accepted them graciously and humbly, and covered them with the end of her mantle. Mensor's companions stood behind him, with heads lowly bowed. Mensor gave gold, because he was full of love and confidence, and had always, with unshaken devotion and untiring efforts, sought after salvation. When Mensor and his companions withdrew, Seir, with his 4 relatives, entered and knelt. He carried in his hand a golden censer, in shape like a boat, filled with small greenish grains like resin. He gave incense, for he was the one that clung to God, voluntarily, reverently, and lovingly following his will. He placed his gift upon the little table and knelt long in adoration. After Seir came Theophano, the eldest of the kings. He could not kneel, because he was too old and stout. He stood, bowing low, and laid upon the table a little golden chip, in which was a fine green herb. It was fresh and living, stood erect like a delicate green bush, and had small white flowers. Theophano offered myrrh, for myrrh is typical of mortification and vanquished passions. This good man had had to struggle against severe temptations to idolatry and polygamy. He remained very long before the infant Jesus, so long that I felt anxious for the good people, the king's followers, who at the entrance were so patiently awaiting their turn to see the child. The words of the kings and their followers were extraordinarily simple and childlike. They were as if inebriated with love. They always began, "We have seen his star, and that he is king over all kings. We have come to adore him and to bring him gifts." With the tenderest tears and most fervent prayers, they commended to the child Jesus themselves, their goods and property, and all they valued on earth. They begged him to take their hearts, their souls, their actions, their thoughts. They entreated him to enlighten them, to bestow upon them all the virtues, and to the whole earth to grant peace, happiness, and love. They were glowing with love. No words could depict their ardor and humility, nor the tears of joy that bathed their cheeks and flowed down the beard of the eldest. They were perfectly happy. They believed that, at last, they had entered into the star, after which their forefathers had so long legitimately sighed, and at which they themselves had so longingly gazed. All the joy of the promise of many hundreds of years, now fulfilled, welled up in their hearts. Joseph and Mary also wept. I never before had seen them so full of joy. The honor paid to their child and Savior, and the recognition of him by the kings, of that child for whom their poverty could afford so poor a couch, of that child the knowledge of whose high dignity lay hidden in the silent humility of their own hearts. All that comforted them immeasurably. They saw brought to him from so great a distance by God's almighty power, and in spite of the machinations of man, what they themselves could not procure for him. For example, the adoration of the great, the magnificent gifts offered with the holy profusion. They adored with those great ones, and the honor their child received inundated their hearts with great, exceedingly great joy. When all the king's servants had withdrawn from their adoration of the king, the three kings again came in together. The kings incensed the child, Mary, Joseph, and the whole cave. This was with them a ceremony expressive of veneration. I saw the kings afterward in a tent reclining on the carpet around a little low table. Joseph brought in little plates of fruit, rolls, honeycomb, and small dishes of vegetables. Then he sat down and ate with them. He was so delighted, and not at all shamefaced. He wept for joy, almost the whole time. I saw neither Mary nor Joseph, nor the maid examining the gifts or showing any worldly pleasure on their account. They were accepted with thanks, and with liberality were again distributed to the needy. On this evening and during the night, I saw in Bethlehem, only at Joseph's paternal house, a noisy bustling to and fro. And when the kings entered that city, there was some excitement. Around the crib cave, all was at first very quiet. After all, I saw here and there in the distance Jews lurking and whispering together, and giving notice in the city of what they had seen. I saw also in Jerusalem on this day many old Jews and priests hurrying to and fro with writings to Herod. And then all became quiet, as if they wished the subject dropped.